A reading from Hebrews chapter 13, verses 1 through 3. Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those who are in prison, as though you were in prison with them. Those who are being tortured, as though you yourselves were being tortured. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church.
Prisons have been an unlikely source for renewal in the life of the church. You might not know this, but most of what we have in the Old Testament was written not literally in a prison cell, but during a time of imprisonment. Most of the ancient texts that we have were put together during the time of the Babylonian exile, while the people of Israel lived in a strange land and were forbidden from going home. It was the absence of home that prompted the ancient scribes to reclaim and retell their sacred stories. Prisons have been an unlikely source of renewal. We're fairly certain that the Apostle Paul spent a fair amount of time in Roman prisons. The confession that Jesus is Lord was often seen as subversive to the Roman Empire, declaring that Caesar is Lord. Most scholars agree that when Paul writes the letter to the church at Philippians, he's writing it while he is incarcerated. Prisons have been an unlikely source of renewal. I can think of two very influential writings that come to us from prison cells. I'm thinking of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who gave his life in opposition to the Third Reich in Germany. In many of his writings that he did while he was imprisoned there, he smuggled out through a friend who took them and held them safe and later published them. That book is entitled Letters and Papers from Prison, and it continues even in this day to guide the church toward faithfulness. I'm also mindful of another letter that was written from a prison cell. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote a letter from the Birmingham jail. And in that letter he implored the white church to pick up the cause of racial justice, that the problem of racism was not so much a problem for black folk to solve, but something that we all have a stake in solving so that our country could be more whole. And no gathering of Methodists thinking about prison ministry should ever forget what John Wesley had to say. John Wesley's vision was of renewal, and that often he would appoint lay people to go out and preach in circuits and lead small Bible study groups for spiritual reflection and growth. And John was adamant that these lay preachers should visit in the prisons regularly. Well, there was one who objected, who pushed back against John and said, "I don't feel comfortable going into the prison. I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to bring God into that place of agony. And John pushed back rather quickly and forcefully, and he said, you do not have to bring God into the prison. God is already there. All you have to do is pay attention, and you will readily and easily see how the unfolding hand of God's mercy is at work. You do not have to bring God to prison. God is already there. Well, I've learned a few facts about prison over these last few months as we've been dealing with this goal from our administrative board. And some of what I've learned has been very troubling. I've learned that the United States incarcerates far more of its citizens than any other nation on the globe. We have more people in our prison system today than they do in Russia. We have more people incarcerated in the land of the free and the home of the brave than they do in China. According to the U.S. Bureau of Justice statistics, there are 2,266,800 adults were incarcerated in the U.S. federal and state prisons and county jails in the year 2011. Additionally, there are 4,814,000 adults at the end of 2011 who were either on probation or parole. In total, 6,977,000 adults were under the correctional supervision in 2011, or about 2.9% of our population. In addition to that, almost 71,000 juveniles were in juvenile detention. So if we combine those numbers, the number of people either incarcerated or on parole or probation is larger than the entire population of the state of Massachusetts. That's larger than Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont doubled. I'm shocked to know that and very concerned. And since on this day we're thinking about women in prison, I learned a little more that was even more troubling. That between 1980 and 2006, the population of women in prison jumped 800%. And the situation is even more grim for minorities. Ethnic minorities comprise 2/3 of all the women who are incarcerated. And most of the women who are behind bars have been convicted for non-violent crimes. That is, they're there for drug possession or prostitution. And even the violent offenders have a heartbreaking story to tell. Up to 90% of the women who have been convicted for murdering a man, murdered the man who had physically abused them. Those are very sobering statistics. Statistics that I think should call us to a higher level of compassion. You can find more of those if you're interested. Well, we have a good history of prison ministry here in Wesley Church. Some of you might remember Ruth Foss. She was a member of our congregation, and since Ruth has gone on and is now gone on to ordained ministry, and she's serving her own congregation. But when Ruth was here, Ruth would go to Shea Farm, a halfway house not far from here, and she'd go and regularly lead Bible study, sit and visit with the inmates, offer words of prayer, and from time to time, folks who lived at Shea Farm would come and worship with us, mostly because they had that connection to Ruth, and Ruth encouraged them to join us. Our UMW has maintained some presence at Shea Farm. Every August, our United Methodist Women group goes, and they have a birthday party for all of the inmates. Cake and ice cream, a simple gift. And at Christmas time, they remember them as well and do what they can to help the incarcerated women have a gift for their children. Well, the state prison for New Hampshire is slated to move from where it is in Goffstown here to the city of Concord. And I think that this presents an opportunity for you and for me to express our Christian faith to people who are hurting. In the letter of Hebrews, we find this verse. Remember those who are in prison as if you yourselves were in prison. Now that verse comes from the concluding chapter of the letter of Hebrews. The first 12 chapters of the letter of Hebrews, the author is dealing with very serious and problematic issues that caused the author to respond to what was going on in the life of that congregation. But chapter 13 seems very different. It's what some might call sort of the fluff at the end, where the writer is commenting on things that really were not in dispute. It wasn't a problem, so the author isn't saying, this is important and this is why, and I compel you and I'm trying to encourage you, but it's kind of the closing statements of agreement that both the author and the reader would already agree to. Probably just a quick and gentle reminder of what has always been at the core of the Christian faith. It's not a detailed argument. None was needed. Remember those who are in prison as if you yourselves were in prison. Just a celebration and a reminder of a common and a consistent practice. Do you know that in the ancient world, prisoners would not be fed? Yet the only way someone who was incarcerated in the Roman prison would get food is if someone visited them and brought them food. They were not given clothing, and if they needed things, it would be a visitor to provide them. Well, you've already had a chance to hear a little bit from Judy Figueroa about her passion and her concern for women who are incarcerated. And Judy and I have talked back and forth over these months since the board set this as one of our goals. And I learned a great deal from you, Judy. Thank you very much. One of the things that she told me is that when a woman or when anyone goes into prison, they go into prison with only the clothes on their back. And when the sentence is complete and they are let out, they are only given the clothes that they brought in with them when they began their sentence. So that means if you begin your sentence on, say, the 15th of July, you go into prison in a pair of flip-flops and shorts and a t-shirt, and then your sentence concludes, say, on the 15th of January, you are released from the prison with those same flip-flops, shorts, and t-shirt. Couldn't Wesley Church, couldn't we be a source of material aid for those women as they exit the prison? Could we not make a difference in those first 10 minutes of freedom by providing appropriate clothing? Now, I know you, and I know you well. I know you to be a generous and caring congregation. All it would require would be for some of us to be willing to take some leadership with some organizational skills to find out who needs what, and stand in front of this very friendly body and ask. Now, I know some of you like to shop, and you want to help. I think we could make a big difference, and it's something we could all do together for God and for hurting people. A second idea has emerged, that we could go into the prison and we could offer, as John Wesley did, opportunity for spiritual conversation and discussion, reflection on how to live life, not in a dogmatic and domineering way, but in a gentle, kind, compassionate way. Judy has put together a whole curriculum of discussion starters and conversations. Now, Judy has the skill and the experience to know what to do. But the next step would be for us as a congregation to gather together a team of people willing to be supportive, willing to do the other things that are necessary to make such a ministry come to fruition. So I'm not going to have an altar call right now. I'm going to have a bulletin board call. Out of the narthex, we've put a little list. We've got room for 5, 7, 8 people. And if you would like to be a part of this ministry, I'd encourage you to go there at the end of the service and write your name down so that we can move these wonderful ideas that Judy has shared with us into the very practice of who we are as a congregation. The next step to make this happen is to gather a team to work together that we might make a difference. Remember those who are in prison as if you yourselves were in prison with them.